This happened a while ago, so I apologize if some things do not seem clear. I've removed this experience from my memory for an obvious reason, but have now decided to tell people about what happened as I realized it's something I shouldn't hide. Me and my brother Ron were in my room watching the NFL, screaming at the screen when our team would do something idiotic. We were 40 minutes into the game. The cornerbacks were messing around, and out of frustration, Ron slammed his fist into the remote, turning off the television by accident. I said, "What the fuck?" and turned the TV back on. As the screen loaded back up, we heard fast-paced footsteps downstairs. Ron and I quickly turned our heads to the bedroom door. I turned down the volume to hear the noises clearer. I think someone's inside," Ron said. I could hear the stutter in his voice. He was anxious. "No, it's probably just the dog," I sighed. Ron, however, was a lot more cautious. He walked over to the door and locked it. The click it made obviously alerted the intruder. At the time, though, I brushed it off as my Jack Russell Terrier. We heard even more footsteps. Ron whispered, "That's not a dog." Ron, being nervous, put me on edge, so I agreed with him and turned off the bedroom lights. Ron ran around the room trying to find some sort of object that we could use as a weapon. I sat next to the door with my ear placed on our wall. They were thin, so if there was anyone inside the house, I would hear it. Nothing happened. It was just dead silence with our heavy breathing. "Take a look," Ron said. He had his phone turned on just in case we needed to phone 911. I lay on my chest and looked through the gap under the bedroom door. I saw blackness, but I could see faded boots down the upstairs hall. I felt my hands shaking as I pushed myself back up to my feet. I tiptoed to Ron, who was waiting anxiously for the answer. "Someone's here," I whispered as low as I could. Ron's face went pale as he stared into nothingness. At one point, I thought he was going to black out on me. I pulled Ron over to our window. I quietly opened the window and looked down at the grass, 2 stories below my current position. Ron was still in a different world, as if he blocked himself from reality, leaving the responsibility to me. I tried not to pay much attention to him and instead focused on escaping. I took Ron's phone out of his hand as he crouched on the carpet. He had installed one of those applications where specific fingerprints can enter the phone. I took his hand, which was shockingly freezing, and held his pointing finger on the screen. I jumped out of my skin when the phone let out a loud beep, and all of a sudden, I could hear footsteps running straight to the bedroom. I quickly typed in 911 and put one leg out of the window. I heard thumps on my bedroom door and shouting. He was shouting, "I'm going to kill you." I landed on the porch roof and shouted at Ron to snap him back into action. Ron stood up quickly and stumbled outside of the window. He landed on the roof beside me as I forced the window shut again. "We need to jump," I said. I could hear faint thumping behind the walls. He was struggling to get inside our room. I jumped off the porch roof and sprained my ankle. Ron was wobbling on the edge of the roof. "Quick," I said. I avoided shouting as whoever the intruder was would have known we were outside. Ron touched his chest, head, right shoulder and left shoulder, making the cross, and jumped. He rolled when he landed on the floor and rubbed his neck as we ran blocks. We had run a good 6 blocks until I realized I had left the dog behind and heard a faint voice in my jean pocket. I pulled out the phone to hear a woman asking if I was still there. I told her that we needed cops immediately. She told us to stay on the line, and cops were en route to the house. I burst into tears from fears of what just happened and worrying if my dog was hurt. I talked to the operator as both me and Ron slowly walked back to the house. We heard the siren and felt weight lifted off of our shoulders. I sat in my chair on the porch, with Ron in a squat position beside me, both of us waiting to come face to face with the intruder. 4 cops came out. There was no man, but one of them was holding Lewis. Lewis was my dog. I stood up and held Lewis, kissing his head and patting his back. I sat back down in the chair and placed him on my lap, still hugging him and apologizing for leaving him behind. The cops explained that there was nobody inside, and there was nothing stolen either. In fact, they explained there was nothing there that would have proven someone invaded our property. And they never found him, but I can assure you I haven't had one good night's sleep since. Every night I lock my door and keep my dog with me in my room. Ron installed some CCTV cameras in both of our houses. We both agreed to never speak about it again. When my dad was 16, he lived in a small farmhouse in the middle of a rural forest area somewhere on the west side of Washington State. It was late at night, and he was watching TV in his basement when he heard the animals in the pens outside begin to whine and make frightened noises. My dad went up to the first floor and looked out the window. He didn't see anything abnormal, just the animals, frightened. He figured it was the rain because of the past few hours it had been coming down pretty hard. As he was about to turn away, however, he saw something that made him freeze. A man had popped up from a crouching position among the sheep and was now staring directly at my dad. They both met eyes for a few seconds before the man darted off in the surrounding forest. My father was filled with fear and worry. He wanted to wake his parents, but they probably wouldn't believe him and tell him to go to sleep because he was imagining things. My dad went back to his TV show in the basement, but not long after, he heard scratching on the outside of the first floor walls. At first he let it go and assumed it was a mouse or small animal, but it wouldn't cease, and he began to get worried. There was more scratching and even more tapping, but then suddenly he heard the shattering of glass breaking. My dad's eyes widened, and he rushed to the closet and took out the family's 12-gauge shotgun. The person had smashed the outside door handle off and reached in through the broken window to unlock the deadbolt. My dad hid in the closet and called 911 with the basement door locked. The TV was off, and he whispered to the operator that someone had broken into his home and he was hiding in his closet with a gun. The operator told him to shoot if the guy attacked and that the cops were on their way. My dad could hear things being knocked over, drawers being opened and slammed shut, cabinets being opened and closed, and doors being opened and slammed. He heard the stairboards creak and stuff being rummaged through on the second floor. A few minutes later, while the guy was still upstairs, officers suddenly stormed the house through the open back door. They were shouting, telling the guy to get on the ground. My dad opened the closet door and made his way out of the basement and into the kitchen. The officers came back down with the man in cuffs. They asked my dad questions about what had happened, if he was hurt, and other stuff the police would need to know. A few glass plates and cups were the only things broken, and besides that, the house was only in mild disarray. My father was tearfully embraced by my grandparents, as they had feared the worst. From that point on, renovations were completed to remove all windows near the entrance to the home. To give you some background, I'm generally not easily scared. I like to stretch my mind and see how far I can go. Zombie nightmares? No problem. Scary movies? I've watched them all. I did notice, however, that there's one thing that keeps repeating in my dreams. I'm terrified of home invasions. If I ever dream about someone uninvited in my house, I freeze, can't move, can't scream, can't run. So I've been doing some thinking as to why that may be, and I figured out why. As a child, I lived in a fairly well-off town in Israel, right on the edge of it, that was separated from a not-so-well-off city by a large field. When I was about 5 or 6, I would sleep in my room with the door open so that I could see into my parents' room across the hall since it made me feel safer. There would be this thing, though. I would wake up in the middle of the night for no particular reason and just stare at the doorway. Then after a few seconds, I would see a silhouette of a person passing by, sometimes pausing at the doorway for a brief second before continuing. It scared the shit out of me, and I would force myself to cry so that my parents would come and check on me. They never found anything and attributed it to bad dreams. This probably happened 4 to 5 times. About a year later, my parents woke up one day to find the drawers in my dad's desk completely out and empty. My dad asked my mom whether she messed around with them. Clearly she didn't. We installed an alarm system. Honestly, with the alarm system, it was worse. One night I woke up, again for no apparent reason, and a second later, this piercing tone rang through the house and wouldn't stop. I freaked out, jumped out of my bed, and looked towards my parents' room. Just then, I see a silhouette of a person sprinting across my doorway down the hallway. By the time my parents got out of their bed, the person was already out of the house, leaving the large door to the house wide open. This happened 3 fucking times. We started getting preemptive. We got one of those motion sensors that play a recorded message when activated. My mom recorded, "Get out of here, you fucking thief," type message, and put it next to the main door of the house. One night I wake up, again for no apparent reason, although I think I know why by now. And 2 seconds later I hear my mom's recorded message cursing at the thief. A few seconds later I hear footsteps of someone running away. At least it worked. And that was the last time that happened. When I was 13, we moved to another country, but would always go back in the summer to visit our extended family and typically stayed at my grandma's. One of my favorite things to do is to stay up late at my grandma's house in Tel Aviv, in the living room, and watch National Geographic after everyone went to sleep. I don't know why, I just found it very relaxing. I was about 14, watching National Geographic at 2 a.m., and I get that fucking feeling. The one that made me wake up when I was little for no apparent reason, except I was awake. I concluded that it was probably nothing, but just in case, I put both of my hands up and middle fingered the whole room slowly. I figured if anyone was watching me, they would have gone away after seeing that. Yeah, right. So at around 3 a.m., I decided to go up to my bed on the second floor. But on my way there, I noticed my mom's bag is on the table. I considered moving it somewhere further away from the window, in case someone wanted to grab it with a broomstick or something. I decide not to, because it's probably not gonna happen, and what if she woke up, couldn't find it, freaked out and called the police? So I'm in my bed, reading a book about ghosts, as I was pretty spiritual at 14 and really wanted to believe. I say in my mind, okay, if you guys are real, give me a sign. The light flickers a little. That could be anything. I'm going to need a bigger sign. At that moment, I hear a huge boom from downstairs. I come out of my room at the same time my mom comes out of her room and my grandma comes out of hers. They ask me why I'm making so much noise. I tell them that I'm not and that I think there's somebody downstairs. My mom tells me, nonsense, it must just be... Boom. My mom begins to freak out and starts screaming things like, "Get out of here, you thief," "Deja vu," and just in general screaming in the direction of the first floor. After a few minutes, she goes down, and with all the irony in the world, the window is broken and the bag on the table is gone. This happened in the mid-90s. I attended a Catholic school as a child, as did my friend Taylor, and we were always given the Monday after Easter off of school. As every weekend, I had opted to spend the night at Taylor's house, this time on Sunday night since we didn't have school the next day. We were 9 years old and in the 4th grade, and we lived in a town that literally this past year was rated the 5th safest town in our state. Our parents had no problems with us being home alone on a Monday. Taylor lived on what I would call an in-town farm, being it was a farm with horses and fields and whatnot, but was right on the edge of town, about a 2-mile drive from the center of our small town. Taylor and I were sleeping in her upstairs bedroom when we were both awakened at about 7:30 a.m. by what was the unmistakable sound of someone kicking in a door downstairs. Her tiny terrier dog Chance ran down and was barking like crazy, and then the banging stopped, and we heard Chance yelp loudly from being kicked or hit. At this point, we were terrified and silent, and Taylor finally whispered if we should call her mom, and I urged her to call 911. While she described to the operator what was happening, we could hear the person walking around downstairs, back and forth, I assume carrying things out of the house. The operator had us quietly get out of the bed, and we went into the closet. I remember sitting there with her on the floor and just praying the police would get there soon. I also remember thinking maybe we should climb out onto the roof of the farmhouse like we often did through her window. The level of fear in my body was something I will never forget and is indescribable. Luckily, in what felt like an eternity, but turned out was less than 5 minutes later, we heard the police pulling up and the cops screaming at someone. After several more minutes, the operator told us it was okay to go downstairs. I'm not sure what loss of communication there was, but when we walked down the stairs and around the corner into the kitchen, 5 cops stood there with their weapons pointed at us. When they saw it was us, they took us into the living room and calmed us down and started with all the questions. In the end, it ended up being one of the laborers who worked for the pool company who was installing a pool who robbed the home. That is how he knew what time Taylor and her family were normally gone from the home. According to the police, he was very remorseful when they told him there were children in the home. I really wish he knew that my entire life I have still lived in fear of home invaders, and when I am home alone with my children now, if my husband is out of town for work, I lay awake or freak out at the slightest sounds. We have also installed a security system for my ease of mind. While writing this entry, I thought to myself to check the court records about the man whose name is still tattooed in my memory. Turns out since that home invasion, he has a laundry list of other charges as recently as 2013 for burglary, assault, battery, and meth. This doesn't help me feel any better about what could have happened to Taylor and myself had he found us there, alone.